Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program, Celebrating Black PR History, Where Are All the Black Men in Public Relations? Your host tonight will be Dr. Chuck Wallington. An introduction will be given by Carmela Glover. Our panelists will include David W. Brown, Devin Jackson, Emmanuel Reed, and Brandon Thomas. Closing remarks by Touré Burgess. Tonight's program is sponsored in part by our founding partner Edelman, is underwritten by BCW and APCO Worldwide, and is also sponsored by the Wallace Foundation, Zeno, Page, Google, the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia, the Black Public Relations Society of New York, and Compro. Now please welcome Carmela Glover.
Okay, so welcome to our live studio audience as well as our virtual participants to Where Are All the Black Men in PR? They're all right here. Just kidding. Just kidding. I am Carmela Glover, and I'm doing your welcome and opening tonight after Barry. I am the president of the Diversity Action Alliance and the chief diversity officer at Page. So I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. I do want to start today with, this is a Museum of PR Black History Month event that we have annually. And it is really great to be back in person for the first time since COVID. So those of you who are here and live. And the important part of what we're doing here at the Museum of PR is rooting ourselves in history and the fact that history has been written and needs to be rewritten in many cases to be more inclusive to those whose stories have not been told. So in light of tonight's panel and tonight's discussions and talk topics, want to just pay tribute and homage to some of those PR leaders in history who were previously omitted and we now recognize as PR pioneers who were Black men. So Frederick Douglass, right? He was an activist and orator. Carter Woodson, who created was Negro History Week, and now is Black History Month, right? And so they were employing the same tactics that every other PR pioneer who was recognized in history was. So you've got Moss Kendricks, who was really instrumental in taking down stereotypical graphics from marketing. And there's plenty more that you can go see on PR Museum. Joseph Varney Baker, the first Black man to open up a PR firm in the US. And you don't necessarily hear about him when you're reading the PR history books. So there are, again, a ton more. Ofield Dukes, who worked for Martin Luther King. I mean, that is what communicators do. We are executive speechwriters, right? So none of these men were traditionally included as Black men in PR history books. And the Museum of PR, through the work that they're doing, through the archiving they're doing of those men's work, and additional diverse representation. So for women, for LGBTQ population, right? For all of them, they are archiving this and helping us to rewrite history. And then we've got folks like we're going to hear from today, who are reshaping history right now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel, but I'll do a little quick plug for the Diversity Action Alliance first. We've just started a survey of communicators of color. We're piloting it with our network of communicators who identify as Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native American, Native Hawaiian, and just asking them about their current experience in communications, whether it's at an agency or in-house. And so far, all of our respondents are women. So that goes to show you where we are. And many of our participants have said that they noticed in their comments that there is a dearth of Black men in PR. And so tonight's topic is relevant. And I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists so we can get to it. So today we have Dr. David Brown, Assistant Dean of Community and Communication at Temple University. We have Emmanuel Reed, who's our account executive at Ogilvy in Chicago. And we also have Brandon Thomas, who's executive vice president at Freud's Group. Welcome. And we have Davon Jackson, who's our senior account supervisor at Agami. Okay. So our panel tonight will be moderated by Dr. Chuck Wallington, who is EVP and Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Cone Health. And I will let Dr. Wellington take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmela. Good evening, everyone. Those of us who are in the room with us, thank you for being in here. If you're online with us, welcome. We invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy this conversation about where are the Black men in the field of public relations. Let me start by setting some context for this discussion. So I have always wondered, where are the folks who look like me in the field of public relations? I have been doing this body of work for over 30 years, actually longer than I care to admit. And in just about every organization I've worked for, I've gone through the doors. I've been very, very happy to be there. And I've looked around and maybe there was one other person who looked like me. That was most likely a Black female, but there were very, very, very few Black men in the field. So I just thought it was maybe I'm not in the right place. Maybe it's just the wrong time. Something's going on here. So it wasn't until I decided to pursue my master's degree in 2017 at Syracuse that Dr. Terry Flynn encouraged me to pursue the topic for my master's research. And so it is from that we're using this data as a foundation for tonight's discussion. So my research was titled Barriers, Borders, and Boundaries. Where are the Black men in the field of public relations? Let me tell you what I found in terms of setting up this research. And I have to put on my glasses because I can't see without them. So here's what the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us. So women represent about 61% of those who are employed as public relations specialists. Men represent about 39% of those who are employed as public relations specialists. So we're talking about entry-level roles. African Americans make up about 9.5% of those who are, again, in the entry-level roles. If you break out those numbers in terms of men and women, African American women are right at about 6%, and Black men of just a little over 3%. So we represent 3% of those who are in the entry-level roles. There's a study that the Page Society commissioned a few years ago asking their members to talk about what it looks like within their respective organizations from a diversity perspective. And here's what that data shows us. If you look at the senior management ranks, racial and ethnic minority, about 8.44% represent a diversity within senior management. If you look at the lower level managerial employees, they're 9.65%. Non-managerial, non-administrative employees, 13.2%, and support and administrative employees, 11.39%. So as you can see, the lower you are in the organization, the more people of color are represented. So it's against this backdrop that I did my research. I conducted 32 interviews with folks who are working in the field of public relations, and there are three overarching themes that arose. First, there's a lack of understanding about public relations among folks who are in high school. So before you even get to college, young men just don't have an understanding for what profession is all about. And as you know, without that early awareness, folks are just not going to be successful when they go into the field. It's hard to attract people into the field, and when they get there, they tend to flounder around. So that was one of the overarching themes. Another theme, once in the profession, there's a shortage of colleagues, especially Black men who can be mentors, who can be sponsors, who can be role models, who can be allies. When this happens, Black men feel alone. They feel isolated. There's no one else there who can relate to them and to their experiences and to their journeys. And finally, the profession has evolved into an industry that's dominated by white females and white males are typically at the top of the totem pole with women who are running the day-to-day. And again, Black men don't see other Black men in decision-making roles, particularly as it pertains to hiring and promoting and training, and so they're just kind of left to figure it out. Also, the data suggests that Black men, by our very presence, can be intimidating to those who don't look like us. And this dynamic presents its own challenges in and of itself. So that's the context for this evening's conversation about, well, where are the Black men in the field of public relations? We're going to talk a little bit later about the experiences of these men here, but the question we want to start with is, given what I've just said, why should anybody care? Why should anybody care? After all, isn't this just a Black problem? Isn't this something that Black men should figure out? Isn't this just something that Black men and Black women should figure out? As a profession, why should anyone care? Want to get us started here?
Sure. Wow. Big question. Why should anyone care? I think that answering that question is who is the we that we're talking about. Why should anyone care? Well, it's all of the groups that you mentioned. It is us. It is people who look like us, but public relations is defined by bringing the best ideas to the table. And if those ideas are not represented in the fullest diverse sense as possible, then we're not bringing the fullest ideas to the table. So it is a problem for the industry. And if it's a problem for the industry, it's going to be a problem for industries that are touched by public relations. So if we somehow, and we, of course, Black men in particular, we need to care about this. But this is just like this is Black History Month. Well, Black history is U.S. history. Our history is very much tied to everyone's history. So how we go can determine how the industry will go.
Very well said.
In answering this question, I hark on the words from the poet Maya Angelou in her work Caged Bird. And just that saying, that phrase, thinking about why does the caged bird sing? Who is the bird in the cage and what is that song? And so in thinking about Black men, the lack of the need, the protection, and the investment into Black men in the world of public relations, I think about that being a caged bird. The song that we are singing up here is a song of success, resilience, and also thinking about the importance of Black history and its connection to not just thriving, really working against the grain, but also living and really encouraging one another, right? Encouraging life as we commonly approach this theme of Black is resiliency, always working against something that's abrasive. So I typically just think in short, who is the caged bird, knowing that it's Black men, not just in PR, but also in Black America, and the world itself. And what song am I helping us sing? What song am I helping these brothers, the brothers in PR who obviously are around, given the numbers that you're saying, albeit not many, but not physically here? And how can I help them sing that song even better?
You need it?
I think you have the mic. Okay, I think the lapels are working.
Make sure they can hear you.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. You know, as I was pondering this question, the thought that I had that kept coming back to me was accountability and understanding how most recently in the past few years, there's been an intentional effort. Most recently in the past few years, there's been an intentional effort around thinking about what DE&I means in particular within our society. And we know that in particular this year, there's a waning in those efforts and those commitments. And I think when we consider those investments and commitments that everyone in 2020 and 2021 were so vested in, understanding that, yes, there were short-term gains that needed to be made, but that we were all in this for the long term. I think that that is where we need to remain rooted in the long term of this journey around creating more inclusive and diverse spaces, in particular for Black men.
Yeah. And when I think to this question about why should anyone care, I always think to how can we get it right as marketers and PR persons? How can we get it right? In order to get it right for the consumer, the strategists behind the campaigns must be reflective of the world that we live in and what we make up. And these diverse voices and perspectives from myself and my colleagues here definitely help brands build that authenticity. And consumers see that at the forefront. And as we know, Black culture drives much of popular culture. So that's why we need to champion for more of these diverse voices to have a seat at the table, not just at the entry level point, but beyond as well.
So gentlemen, all of us have a story, right? There's a story about how we arrived to be able to sit at this podium today and to be able to share our stories. I'd love for you to briefly tell your journey, but specifically talk about what's the one thing that you would like to have had more of in your journey? So briefly tell us about your journey, but what's the one thing you would like to have had more of in your journey?
Wow. This will sound incredibly egotistical and arrogant, but I wish I had had more me when I was on my journey, because I didn't have a me. Unfortunately, I was or fortunately, survivor of a drive-by shooting when I was a teenager, and realized, because I was scared off the street, literally, to go and write, that I had a talent for writing, and I didn't know that having a talent for writing could go into a profession, because there was nobody like me ahead of me who was traveling the path that I wanted to know, and I didn't even know it existed. So that was an inflection point for me to say, wow, not only can I write, because I've been told, and I'm love to hear everyone else's story, that you're not a good writer, you're not this. This is in college when I was told that you'll never, I would never say this to any young person, say you will never make it in this business. A professor, and every time I got a promotion, this is real petty, but I'm going to claim it. Every time I got a promotion, I would send it back to him and say, hey, still not making it. But the point is that, if there's no one to see what you can be, then there's no one to pull you along. So I wish I had had more me, because I had it in me all along. I just needed someone to help pull it out.
Great point. I think in general, the themes of mentorship and exposure are going to be very prevalent, and those are two major themes in my story as well, throughout my collegiate journey, and then as well entry level, starting out. Certainly wishing that you could just see more of this in the examples of intergenerational success, even as is evident on the panel, that, and tying back into exposure, having not safe spaces, but I like to say courage spaces. So opportunities to be in close one-on-one relationship with a senior Black man, as you were saying, in a decision-making capacity, as well as those who operate horizontally. And then as you continue to elevate it, as you said, you bring up others after. But as you start to understand the power of cultivating community and the leadership that comes from that, mentorship starting out, as well as exposure. And you mentioned that, and we can get into that more. But those two themes, as you were saying, were very much what I was looking for, both again at the university level and then starting out. And then I continue to approach my work as, how can I continue to then make a courage space for someone else? Well, sometimes that means you got to have the courage to do what's right. And that means staying in the business and going against that abrasive gain for the next generation.
Great points. And, I would build on that by saying, especially early on in your career, more equity for entry-level employees. Entering the PR industry is a very competitive space. And I think that most recently we're having lots of great conversations around what does equity look like, in particular for people of color. But when I started out in the industry almost 15 years ago, I don't believe that there was that. There was an understanding of what that looked like in practice. And so in thinking about my journey, I think more equity would be my answer. My career has been rooted in agency PR, and I now sit in a very, sit here humbly in a leadership role for a company that's headquartered in London, overseeing their New York office and operations. And it kind of takes my breath away thinking about where I started in my industry. But I do remember having a mentor, and if one thing that I can sort of advocate for is finding, to the point, mentors, perhaps some that don't look like you, say to me, if you just stick with this, you're going to be a unicorn. And when she said that to me when I was early on in my career, it really didn't set in. I thought, listen, I just need to keep my job and get promoted, and I want to stay here in New York City. But then I reflect on that in this moment, sitting here on this panel with gentlemen who look like me doing what I do, and us saying that there's not very many of us because we are the unicorns. So, for me, I think thinking about equity early on, listening to your research and what your research represents is going to be key as we move forward.
Right. And I started my career in media, and I quickly learned that there weren't many that looked like me in media or on the publishing side, and pivoted to PR to learn the same lesson. But what I wish I had more of was community and those shared experiences, even starting from entry level to where I am presently. not having anyone to bounce ideas off of or navigate any challenges was the challenge in itself. And even when I looked to mentors or colleagues or even friends, there were, always felt one of, or felt that there were relationships that, were a bit more tight knit than I, just because of those differences. So having that community and building that community, whether it's, with your colleagues or networking events, which there was more opportunity and space for.
So, gentlemen, I am curious, when you were growing up, by show of hands, how many of you knew of, met someone who looks like us who was in the field of public relations? By show of hands. Okay, one. All right. So, question for all of you, how did you know that the field of public relations was something you wanted to do when only one of you saw someone growing up? How'd you know? How'd you know this was the field for you, David?
Well, I think that kind of goes back to your research about lack of understanding or even knowledge of public relations when you're in high school. And it wasn't even a thing. As a matter of fact, when I went to college, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That was my job. Then I heard about this thing called PR, and they said they make more money out of that. I said, well, I'll pursue that, but not even knowing that that was the path. And then I was very fortunate in that I got an internship when I was in college, sophomore, a small agency. Actually, it was a large agency for the Philadelphia market, but they gave me an internship every summer from my second year, third year. So by the time I graduated, I really knew what public relations and was a profession. However, even in that setting, I was the only African American, forget person of color, African American male in the whole firm. So there was no one to go to say, and I think about just what my fellow colleagues said about, not having those courageous spaces, to your point, to think that, why am I getting this assignment? Why am I getting that? I just had to kind of push through the resiliency, and we'll figure it out later. But by the same token, it would have been really, really helpful if someone showed me the broader universe of what public relations is, what it could do. A lot of it was learning on the job and going forward. And fortunately or unfortunately, I would say unfortunate, that there was not space to fail up. You make a mistake, you're out. And so if I had a setting where I could literally fail up and learn, by the time I started figuring things out, I found the people who could help me in failing up. But that was so critical, because otherwise there's already an assumption, I'm just going to say it, that you can't write, that you're from a certain place, that you don't have a good articulation, you're only going to be assigned certain clients. And if that feels like normal to you, you're not seeing the bigger picture.
That was a great comment on failing up. Yeah, very impactful. Part of the reason I smiled when I raised my hand is, in thinking about the question with more context, I realized probably the first person I realized who was and still is a PR practitioner is my mom. The proud son of a pastor. I grew up seeing, reading, writing, speaking, without even really thinking about it in a moment. So it's not until I'm, more removed from the family unit, keyword on family, which is a key driver as to how, in terms of these conversations about how is Black life X, how do we bring it into the 21st, 22nd, 23rd centuries? Understanding the power and importance of Black family, going back to mentorship and exposure, you can get that at the home. So I have to shout out my mom, because those early lessons of understanding the power of communication, how to mold the mind and how to exercise leadership. Also, again, to shout out my father, a very strong, still working Black man, but seeing that from a Black woman in that space and how that now rivals my experience, that was also important, because then from an early age, having those healthy family connections, I also saw, and shouting out Black women in the space as well, who are also pioneers in their own right. So the first PR practitioner, not even really realizing until later in my career, being my mom, but those lessons of understanding personal branding, and then how to really share with passion, conviction, and spirit, really core tenets of the Black experience, these core elements of being a PR practitioner. So a huge shout out to my upbringing there, and then thinking about those lessons as those continue to power and strengthen the work that I do, and we all do today. So.
Yeah, my response is a little bit out of Emmanuel's book in terms of thinking a bit broader about PR in the context of communications. And I remember growing up and being so enthralled by news media and seeing some of the great orators of my time, like Robin Roberts, Brian Gumbles, Oprah Winfrey's, like take a microphone and run with it and communicate and convey messages to audiences that really resonated. And I remember thinking to myself in that time, wow, it's such a fascinating space to be in, to be able to articulate a message that resonates and reaches people no matter what they look like. And for that person to be able to do that, to be a person of color and to be a Black person was really compelling to me. And so I always knew that I wanted to be in some sort of space that would allow me to publicly speak. What I came to learn coming to the PR industry and working in traditional agency life is that there's so much more than just public speaking. To the good points, there's writing, there's strategy, there's so many different elements that I think at times, sometimes Black men can be looked at as not as equipped or qualified to take on those roles. But again, I think my sort of initial desire came from the news media space and what I was able to observe in terms of influences within the Black culture.
And similarly, I did not know much about PR. As I said, I started my career in media. So I was in the fashion closets of Harper's Bazaar, and I had a strong love and desire for magazines and publishing, but didn't understand the inner workings behind it. So part of my role was to outreach publicists from various fashion houses to get clothing into the books. So I learned about PR through my curiosity. I realized that magazines and publishing was changing and everything was going digital at this time. So that what interested me to understand what was behind the curtain on the other end. And then once I got there, I learned, how many types of roles or the importance that a publicist would play for various brands. And through curiosity, I was able to take a lot of things on the chin as, not being the majority. So through that curiosity, I was able to really understand and find my tribe. So now I am at Igami Group, where it's a multicultural marketing agency and PR agency where culture is at the forefront. And I think that's such an important piece of the industry that, even as a Black publicist, that we are still trying to find our home and culture.
I also just quickly think of the nuance in terms of my generation of getting their information from the traditional news media of television and thinking about this generation having access to things like social media and other platforms for getting their sources of information. And I think about even the space of LinkedIn and leveraging LinkedIn and being able to see Black leaders in a different way on even, a social media platform that didn't exist when I was growing up, thinking about what I could be in this space. So I'm encouraged in that way, the power that social media can have for the next generation. So just wanted to add that in.
So gentlemen, I mentioned early on that in my research, one of the things that came out is that Black men have talked about how there's the double challenge of being Black and male in a predominantly female industry. I would love to know from your own experiences, what has that been like? Has that been a challenge for you or not, being a Black male in an industry dominated primarily by females?
Well, yeah, well, I would say that our Black maleness is a superpower. That duality is a superpower, and I think sometimes we don't always bring the superpower to the equation. I would say though that even when we step out of the spaces where we're working, we're reminded very quickly when we're on the street that we are a Black male. I mean, it always amazes me that. My voice, someone said now that we're out of Zoom that I sound a lot taller than I am. Look, I've been 5'6" since sixth grade. So, but I have been in spaces where someone would say that because of my voice, I'm intimidating, or that or if I'm trying to make a point that I'm being forceful. I mean, adjectives that are just kind of loaded with, if it's somewhere else, they might be viewed as being assertive. So me having to check myself is almost like me suppressing my superpower, because I know at least that I can operate in the corner suite and on the street corner. That can't happen with a lot of other people. And I think sometimes we don't always, and I'm going back to the word that the manual you said about courage, sometimes we don't feel courageous enough to be our fullest self, to be bring all we can, because it's not always safe. That if somehow we are viewed that reinforces a stereotype, we may not get the plum assignment, we may not get the great client, we may not get the promotion that we deserve. So we've got to determine, when do we use our superpower? And sometimes I think that's not everybody's. I mean, everyone has a superpower, but I think with Black men in particular, we've got to figure out when best to whip out the cape and when to put it in our suit jacket.
Man, crushing the imagery.
I'm a pastor, man. That's what I do.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I felt it. I felt it. All right. Yeah, I think in short, the seeing more opportunities to grow, right? I mean, if you think about any sport team that you might have been on growing up, how different it might have been from communicating with the captain, in my instance, the captain of my rugby team, and then going into the classroom and understanding how to communicate most efficiently, but ultimately for the team's success. So that's really how I approach, even though there might not be a consortium of Black men, and also just men in general might be lower, I still think it's, I tend to focus on the opportunity. So even though there might be less of my identity, how can I continue to, as you were saying, brother, permeate the space, integrate my ideas organically and authentically. And as you were saying, brother, put your cape out, but also have the humility, to your point, to sit back, listen, no matter who's on the team, the gender makeup, the identity makeup, et cetera, sit back and say, okay, what does the team need to succeed, and how can I continue to serve so that all of our clients and the community can have the best resulting work?
A slight build, because I love the Superman cape analogy so much. When I think about what that means in the essence of courage, I build on this concept of it taking time to build up. It's like riding a bicycle, building up the courage to be able to pull out your cape as a Black man in the communication space takes time, and it only gets better the more you do it. I've noticed that is probably a lot different than probably other experiences that that our white counterparts might have in the industry. I've seen it now sitting in a leadership position with junior talent, right? Sometimes people of color are a little bit more reserved with sharing ideas, while our white counterparts might be eager and willing to share the thing that comes to the top of their mind, which there's nothing wrong with that. But how do we get to a place where, Black men, people of color, feel that same enthusiasm and excitement to immediately feel free to share the idea that's top of mind? So in my experience, I think about understanding that superpower now, but as a young person, needing to really get going on the bicycle before I felt comfortable and courageous enough to do it, to do it as freely as I feel confident in doing now.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'd say through my experience, I, coming up with quickly understood that I was a personality hire or checked the diversity box, whether it was through microaggressions or conversations where that were held, and didn't know exactly what to make of that. So having that courage or being confident in my own ideas and viewpoints took me a bit longer to obtain and feel confident in. So that having that experience and understanding that, my views and my opinions matter while I am at this seat at the table is very important for, for us to just realize as individuals. But then I also want to ensure that I am encouraging the younger generation and Gen Z that is coming into the workforce to be their selves, and also reflect that world that we live in back to us on the day-to-day.
Dr. Chuck, just one quick build to your sort of initial thought around the optics of being a Black man in PR, in particular, thinking about the recent years that we have been in, having a bit of a human moment. There have been times where in spaces predominantly white spaces, you do think how you show up, or the gestures, or whether or not you're going to hug someone, or some of those things. And I actually, in a recent conversation with a colleague, sort of had a conversation about that, and they were surprised that even those thoughts were going through my mind around intentionally, how am I showing up in spaces? What am I saying? How am I shaking hands? All of those things, because it didn't even sort of cross their mind that that would be the experience of Black men, but just to acknowledge kind of your initial point around that piece.
Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes. We're going to get through 2 questions in 5 minutes, and here's how we're going to do it. So, David and Emmanuel, what role, if any, do others who do not look like us play in closing this gap?
Wow. So I would think that that gets to the point of advocacy and allies, right? So, because there are going to be people who are going to be in the room when you're not in the room, that they need to be able to speak for you. And that's just the reality. It's not fair, but that's what it is, right? So I think that we talked before about mentorship, and honestly, mentorship need not be a singular role. Many people can mentor. I often tell folks who are coming up, get yourself a board of advisors, because different people can play different roles that can help you. Some could be advocates, some could be allies, some can be the crying board. Look, or sometimes we just need to yell and cuss at the moon. That's okay, because sometimes you need to find those spaces. And if those spaces don't exist, you have to create those spaces.
And not much to add. I really love that idea of the board of directors and getting people who can hold you accountable, tell you what you're doing well, what you need to fix, what you need to work on. So I really think you covered a lot of the points. I think the only thing I would add being a saying in my younger days being, know your story, tell it well, and tell it often. So I think to your point, if you do those 3 things to these advocates and allies, that'll help the mission.
Last 2 questions are for Brendan and Davon, and they are, so what advice do you have for Black men who are currently in the profession, and what do you have advice for Black men who are looking at the profession and considering it as a field of study?
I'll start with Black professionals currently in the profession. It's, know your value and know your worth. Take a moment, and I always say, write down your intention. Think about what's your sort of unique value proposition that you bring to the situation you're in. There's always one, in particular in our industry right now, where there's not very many people that look like us. So, know your value, know your worth, and think about what's the thing that makes you uniquely you.
All right. And for those who are interested in the profession, I would suggest to reach out to like myself or colleagues on LinkedIn. We are dying for more talent and also in mentorship opportunities. And I know sometimes those cold calls can feel scary or intimidating, but you'd be surprised of how much we're looking to pay it forward, et cetera.
Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. We're going to wrap this piece of it up and open it for questions and answers. So from those of you here in the audience, we'd love to hear your questions. And if you're online, we'd love to hear from you as well. So what thoughts, questions, comments do you have for us? Yes, sir.
Recently, I had a conversation with a person who dubiously calls himself a doctor. I respect him, but he did say that DEI is BS. How would you respond to that?
All right. So DEI is BS, gentlemen. What do you think?
How much time we got? No, I think that, and it was even mentioned here by our colleagues, that it's always been an issue: diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility. You name it. No, let me say it straight out: it is not BS. It is so important. It's always been important. It just has been amplified over the last several years, and we have an even bigger responsibility now that the spotlight has faded a little bit. That we need to find a different way to illuminate it. So it's critical to business in terms of a core business strategy, and again, as I mentioned before, it gets the best ideas around the table, and ultimately that's going to affect the bottom line.
I was just going to say that I think part of the sentiment around DE&I being BS is that this idea of frustration around perfection. and understanding or giving yourself the grace to know that DE&I is a journey and that progress is good as well. We do live in a culture, unfortunately, sometimes that is very brutal when it comes to not getting it necessarily right the first time. But I do think that we need to give ourselves more space and understanding that there is value in this in the long term. We had so many conversations early on when there was so much spotlight on this issue in 2020 and 2021 around what the long-term process of this looked like. And I think that we're at the inflection point of that. Like, we are in the middle of 4 years now removed from it, that point where we talked about this sort of stuff being difficult and hard and not necessarily easy. And so I'm optimistic and hopeful that hopefully there's going to be a lot of companies that understand and see the value in sticking with that long-term vision and not being discouraged by comments such as that.
Thank you for the question. Are there others? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I was wondering, we talked a lot about like the struggles of being a Black man in PR. I was wondering from the panel, what would you say is a win for you as a Black man in PR? And in what ways are you now yourselves holding the door open for other Black folks to follow behind you?
Great question, gentlemen. What are your wins and how are you keeping the door open for the next generation? Who wants to start?
I had a former coach say, having fun is doing something well. And I'm not going to act like I'm the greatest PR practitioner that ever was, that either any one of us are flawless. We're all still growing, but a very tangible win can be, for me, I've seen so far, is seeing the power and beauty of making sure that in this quest for common ground, which really would be lost. To answer your question quickly, I'll just ask, what does a world without it look like? But to answer your question, in this quest of trying to find common ground, it's been a true joy of making sure that Black voices are not forgotten. And whether it comes from, whatever realm of PR you might be working from media relations to executive writing, corporate visibility, et cetera, there's an immense joy in seeing the beauty of your community represented in your work and ensuring that exactly what you were saying, the conversations, the buzzwords, whatever the contemporary moment is concerning Black life in particular, that the work that I can do ensures that Black life is not forgotten and championed. And it helps ground me to be a servant leader. And so then I can continue to serve, exactly to the point you were saying, go on LinkedIn, talk about the win, and then continue to build the next generation's interest in the field itself. Because to your point, you're right. You can't go into the room and always acknowledge what's the problem and what's the only in the situation. Even if you are that person, you got to look at the joy as well. So certainly a lot of joy in the business.
I was just going to quickly say, I love the question and want to acknowledge that that's a great question. And I would say a win for me is definitely becoming the thing that I didn't regularly see in the spaces when I was a young person, and recognizing when young people appreciate that. I feel like this new generation is more vocal than perhaps I was. And so there have been many times where young people will come up and sort of bluntly say, it's really great to see a Black VP in this role, et cetera, et cetera. And that, that means a lot to me because I think it's what we need more of. And we're seeing that throughout our industry. The other thing that I would be remiss in not acknowledging is the allyship that I do think that I experienced during moments throughout my career, which takes me to the point, and then maybe a quick piece of advice, it's to the mentorship piece, finding mentors that look like you, but also trying to find mentors that don't look like you, because there's value in both. And I think throughout my career, trying to find that balance the right way has helped move things forward.
For myself, like I said, sometimes I felt like I was the personality hire or the diversity box. So a win for me was using my influence to have those challenging conversations internally and to spark change, whether that was to diversify the types of influencers that we partnered with for campaigns or the types of media outlets that we engaged with. So using my influence from internally to change our external perceptions.
I'd bet a really quick win. For me, a win was also a loss. I was proud to be having won to be the only African American in Philadelphia to be inducted into the Public Relations Hall of Fame. That's a great win, but it's a great loss because how in a diverse city like Philadelphia that after 25 years you're the only one. So that was a loss, but the other win became I made sure that I inducted somebody else. So we got to reach up and reach back as we climb.
Thank you, gentlemen. Other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am. It's okay.
So there's this kind of like a painful truth that I've seen in many kind of people of colors in general, is that we kind of think that as long as we work hard enough, just work, people will recognize our values. But then I feel like it's most of the time it's not the case. So how do you kind of encourage yourself to really stand up for yourself and seize the opportunities?
So thank you for that question. I'm going to insert myself in this conversation and invite my colleagues. So my own experiences and my research has pointed out the following. We can work like slaves all day, every day, twice on Sunday and do incredible work. And unless and until we have a combination of mentors, sponsors, coaches, and allies who understand and value the work that we're doing and say on our behalf, these guys are doing some incredible work. And when we have the next opportunity, we're going to ensure that they're in a position to be invited into the room, to participate in those roles, to take on those roles, and we're going to support them so that they are successful. It's one thing for the door to be open. It's another altogether for the door to be open and us to be invited in with the goal of us being wildly successful at that which we've been asked to do and what we've been called to do. So there's that dynamic that has to be the foundation. The other piece that research shows is that until the most senior people in an organization understand and appreciate the value of diversity in the workplace, the value of diversity in your corporate communications and in your marketing functions, it's likely not going to happen. So to the question of what role do others play, it is that. It's an acknowledgement that this is a value. It's an acknowledgement that it's important, and it's something that the CEO and her team has to say, we're going to make this a priority, and here's how we're going to make it a priority, not just in the marketing and communications ranks, but frankly, in every function for which the CEO has oversight and responsibility. Unless and until that happens, I say to you right here, as we sit here on this evening, we'll be having this conversation in 3 years. We'll be having the same conversation in 5 years. And you all will be having the conversation in 10 years, right? Nothing will change. Very little will change. So that's the context against which I want to invite folks to comment on this. But I share to you that absolutely has to happen. There has to be a commitment among folks who do not look like us, but support us and say, this is important for the organization. It's important for the business because it's going to ultimately help drive my business results. So colleagues, I invite you to just chime in there as you want to.
Yeah, and from my experience, just to add on to that, one way that I was able to advocate for myself was through collaboration and finding the right voices to partner with or the right key players to partner with to one, just show my added value, but then also have a team added value. Because like to your point, if you sing your own praises to just one person or they only one small group understand your work value, they may just want to pull more out of you opposed to bring you along the journey and having that seat at the table.
You know, having the opportunity now to sit in some of those leadership spaces, I've been humbled by the concept of you don't know what you don't know. And so to your point of, you know, potentially being in a mid-level role and just working really hard, there may be a little bit of, and not to give maybe too much grace, right, of you don't know what you don't know. And so advocating for yourself and finding ways to advocate for yourself, either through your manager or mentors, so much to Dr. Chuck's point, you know, there's methods and ways to do that. But there was like a light bulb moment in working with leaders where, you know, you may be at the top making great business decisions and making a lot of money for a company, but finding moments where, and what I've appreciated in those interactions is the humility to say, actually, I don't know that. You know, how can you help me better understand that? And that's been a lot of my experience, which is why I'm optimistic. So yeah, just understanding, you know, where can I advocate for myself? Where can I provide a new piece of information that can help inform decision making, help leaders better understand the experience that you're going through?
And the asking for help piece is huge. Just knowing that connection to Black men overall, men really in general. That's a whole nother conversation.
Why is that a challenge for us? Why are we reluctant to ask for help?
That's,
Talk about the dynamics of what happens when we ask for help.
you know, it is a 300,000-year-old relationship with pride and ego. The socialization of, I have to be perfect in this space. And if I communicate, I don't know, then does that mean I cannot? And it's a very difficult question to grapple, both in a professional and personal sense as well. And it is a very open acknowledgement that in this quest for knowledge, I may stumble and fall, but I will continue to move forward. So, but to your earlier point, it's you must surround yourself with this board of directors who can not tell you the path. Oh, there's a rock there, there's a pond there, don't go there. They will instruct you to the best of their ability so you can see what path you want to walk on. And then they'll be there when you do stumble and fall, but then you have this community of folks who can support you. To answer your question, very, very valid inquiry as well as, you know, how do you get to the next level and how do I continue to advance? Is it really just this midnight oil burning experience? A very influential brother of mine, William Belt, said, the opportunity of a lifetime lies in the lifetime of the opportunity. Annie Pearl Avery, member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I had the pleasure of meeting her in Atlanta during my days at university. And she said, more succinctly, you must be aggressive about your education. Whatever education is for you, I implore you to do it with aggressive energy. And lastly, roses do not grow from concrete, they grow from dirt. And if you do not learn to love dirt and get your hands really in the soil, and you only want the smooth travels of the concrete, then you'll pass by roses your entire life.
Man, I'm stealing sermon material now. That's what I'm doing. But what I would say, though, is that a couple things. One, we can't buy into the fallacy that you just work hard. That's all going to be, because I think a lot of times, particularly folks of color, are almost saying, "Oh, just keep doing it." You know, honestly, that's how it was done before. No, it wasn't, because self-care is very important, right? And I would say, Dr. Chuck, to your point before about the research, one thing that we don't see is how many people who are in the industry who are no longer in the industry, because they're not there to count. Because there's this, whether it got too hard, it wasn't for them, or whatever. So I think that's important to recognize. I guess the other thing too is your analogy, Dr. Chuck, about opening the door and we have to value whether or not the room is worth staying in. And I think that part of what we're looking at, particularly as it relates to networking and understanding and so forth, we should all know where there are openings. We just had a conversation before about getting out of a toxic place. If you're in a toxic place, the water doesn't unpollute itself. You get more and more toxic, right? So after a while, if you don't know that there's another opportunity where you're going to be valued, where your work is going to be acknowledged, where you're going to be compensated, where there might be a better opportunity, you know, they say, if you go through hell, keep digging. That's not right. We need to figure out that, no, this is not right for me. Where can it be better? Because I am better than where I am. And we have to keep recognizing that we have value in that.
Thank you. So Matilda says we have 1 more minute left. We're going to do one more quick question, sir.
It's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm very happy to be here. Unlike probably, well, you gentlemen and many in the room, I didn't come from and grow up in the PR world. Grew up in the media world as a television producer. My father was a journalist. I wanted to be a journalist, and so I followed that path and found a lot of similarities and challenges in that business for 15 years working at the networks. But I think to that last point about having that network that could support you, that was really important, I found, in the media. Coming to the PR side, starting my own agency with another former colleague of mine who worked in television, who's not Black. I've not found that network. It's been very hard to come together as I would in the TV world. I know every Black TV producer. I'm at events with them. They still call me, and I'm still part of that community. And if I wanted to get back into it, I could. I'd find those opportunities. I don't find that in the public relations field. And so I'm curious, as we talk about this and supporting each other, how do we bring each other together? How do we find where everyone is and bring them together on a regular basis where we can not just share experiences, but share those opportunities, talk about these challenges, find that allyship that we need and bring those folks in too. Again, from my prior, experience, my prior career, I saw a lot of that, and it's got its own challenges too, no doubt. But I don't see that within the public relations field. In fact, I find it to be as competitive as television can be in journalism. I find PR to be even more competitive, and lack of wanting to help and share, because this is mine and I don't want you to have it. Versus, I don't lose anything by helping you. In fact, I can gain. And so I just kind of your thoughts on that, because it's something that I've noticed in the 10 years that I've now been in the business.
Great. Thank you. So a couple things before we quickly go around. 30 seconds, 1 minute. Okay. So you now have 5, right? Congratulations. Welcome. Welcome. Right. So you have 5, and I challenge you to make sure that you know how to contact us before you leave here this evening. We are 5 people to start your network. And that's how it starts. It truly starts one conversation at a time, when you say, you know what? I'm lost. I need somebody to talk to. I just need to be real and authentic with someone. Can you help me? So here you have 5 right here, including me. We're happy to help you. That's the first step, acknowledging that you want to be a part of a larger group and then reaching out. And so here you have 5. Who else wants to add for this? Because Matilda's giving me the sign. David.
Yeah, I mean, you also have organizations in the room. We're going to be hearing from Brother Torre in a second about the Black Public Relations Society. We've got the Diversity Action Alliance, and call a happy hour. Shoot, man, we show up. Seriously, it's like, why not? Because I think that, to your point, we have to find each other, and this could be the start of that.
Thank you. So the good news is we're out. Well, we could talk forever. The bad news is we're out of time. But please join me in welcoming and thanking these esteemed men for sharing their perspectives on tonight. Amazing panel. And our colleague Torre is going to wrap it up. So Torre, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. And thank you for this conversation. I view this is the work, right? Having these conversations, hosting these conversations. Thank you to the Museum of PR, excuse me, for hosting this and really bringing us all together. 6 now. So there you go, great start. I started out my career a couple years ago and found Black Public Relations Society of New York. And it was a home for me. And it was a really great place to connect with other PR practitioners, PR and communications practitioners. And so it was a perfect lead-in, but I am proud to be here today as the chair of our Black Men in Communications programming. And that is really about creating spaces for us to connect, to be with each other, to scream at one another, and to, this is what's going on in work. And so I'm going to read, I know that we're almost at time, so I'll keep this brief, but generally, BPRS New York, Black Public Relations Society of New York, is the premier organization for Black professionals. And so with that, for Black Men in Communications, we want the same sort of platform. We want Black male practitioners specifically for this program, but everybody is welcome in the larger society and organization. We want them to have a safe space, have a courageous space. I love that. Thank you for that. Have a courageous space to talk, connect, and be with one another. We seek to empower current and future practitioners by creating opportunities and spaces for fellowship, support, and enlightenment among industry peers, which is important. I think that this conversation started the work, but, and to go off of the analogy, it is a power to communicate. It is a superpower to give voice to the unseen and unheard. And that is so often what we do as Black communicators, but even more generally, BIPOC communicators. when we're not in the room, somebody has to speak for us. And so even if you are the only one, it is immensely powerful to use your voice. So I implore you all to do that. I know that we have to go. So I implore you all to do that. I implore you all to create spaces that not only allow for resiliency to continue to push forward, but also authenticity. It is important to bring your most authentic self to work or to whatever space you're in, because it gives license for others to do the same. So I will leave with those words. I will be back shortly, but thank you guys for this.
Right. So thank you so much, everyone who joined us tonight, you here in person and all of you who joined us online. I want to thank our founding partner, Edelman. And this program is also sponsored in part by and underwritten by BCW and APCO Worldwide. It's sponsored in part by the Wallace Foundation, CNO, Page, Google, and the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication and the Department of Advertising and Public Relations at the University of Georgia, the Black Public Relations Society of New York, and Compro. So again, thank you all so much for joining us, for giving us a space and listening to all these men sharing their journeys and experience. Please feel free to stay for networking. We have some wine and brownies from Faye Shapiro's Bakery. And again, thank you all so much for joining us and have a great, wonderful rest of your evening.